disappear when I disappear. Okay, I'm
here
just
alone?
start recording now. So hello everyone, welcome back to the next session in our TDSIG and GISIG web carnival. Before I introduce our next speakers, I just want to tell you about our the fact that obviously this event is free for everyone, but if you do want to make a contribution, then we are collecting for charity. So it's a donate what you can event, and so if you can even donate just a little something, we would appreciate it. If you go to tdsig.org/web carnival, which is where you'll find all the information about this event, you'll also see this image, and you can go there and you can make your donation. So we'd appreciate that. Okay, so our session now, we are joined by two speakers, and the way this will work is that each of our speakers will speak for 15 minutes, and then we will open 2 breakout rooms, and you can choose which speaker you want to join in those rooms in order to ask them some more questions and discuss the issues that they've raised. So our 2 speakers are Ila and Chris. Ila is very easy for me to introduce because she's my friend and colleague on the Raise Up project and that we work together on. She's a teacher, trainer and materials writer based in Germany, originally from Brazil. And so it's very nice for me to be able to introduce her here today. Chris is originally from Cardiff, and he holds an MED in Applied Linguistics and researches representation of diversity in ELT materials, and he's currently based in Madrid. So Ila, you're going to be first. So over to you, and I'll see you at the end of the presentations.
Okay, thank you, James. Thank you, Chris. See you in a bit. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. James said, my name is Ila Coimbra, and I'm one of the co-founders, along with James, of the Raise Up project, project that is focused on developing ELT materials that are more inclusive. And this is exactly what I'm going to be talking about. Today, I'm going to talk about how we can make our lessons more inclusive by making your materials more inclusive. Also, but I'm going to start talking about why is it important to have more representation in the materials we use in classroom. And in the end, I'm going to mention some traps that we might fall in when we are trying to produce materials that are more inclusive. Okay, so without much, because I don't have much time, let's start. So why do we have to think about representation in our classroom? Why do we need to have materials that are more that represent the society and the reality we are in more accurately? There is this famous quote about representation that says, you can't be it if you can't see it. And this actually means that if you see yourself or if you identify with someone and this person is doing something, you can actually imagine yourself doing that thing. So putting in very simple words. And we have we have just had finally a good example of that in the last elections, when in Harris's victory speech, she said, one of the things that she said is, because every little girl watching tonight see that this is a country of possibilities. And that means that every little girl, every little Black girl in the United States could look into the TV and imagine that they can be vice presidents, because so far, all the vice presidents were men, white men. From the moment that a little Black girl can identify with someone that is vice president, in her imaginarium, she can also be vice president. If we transfer that to our classroom when our students open their materials, or either handouts we bring, course books, or any type of videos, anything that we bring to the classroom, and they don't see themselves there, they might not think that they belong to the English world. And this affects their motivation seriously, because I'm a Black woman, for example, and I don't see Black women speaking English in the materials, videos, things that are brought to my classroom. So do I really belong? Am I a legitimate speaker of that language? And then we are talking about ownership also. So if I don't see myself in the English speaking world that is brought to me through the materials, I don't think I can speak that language. And there are studies that show that there can even be resistance from the students to the classroom routines if they actually cannot identify themselves with a world that speaks that language. And of course, it goes without saying that that word is not accurately represented, because the English speaking world is not male, white, heterosexual, and etc. It's as varied and as diverse as the world we live in, because, well, that's the part of the world. Another issue about representation, and it's how we empower learners to do more. I love this quote that says that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any power. Again, we come back to the legitimate speaker of English. If our students don't see themselves there, they don't think they have the power to study that language or to be in that world, or they don't have the right to be in that world, or the world, they don't belong there. So this is one of the big issues, representation. It affects ownership of language. And it actually affects students' motivation. Paulo Freire said once that educators make it possible. The role of educator is to make it possible for students to become themselves. And this is a role that cannot be performed by the teacher if the teacher is not worried about making their materials more representative, better representing the reality. And last but not least, one important issue is about bullying and representation. When you think about bullying, you think that the victim of bullying is bullied because they are interpreted as different, as not standard, as atypical, and this leads to bullying. The thing is, anything that is not into the classroom, is not in the student's world, is going to be deviant or different. If we bring a more accurate representation of society to our classroom, whatever background our students have, they will be in touch with a more diverse world. And this will take away the aspect of atypical, deviant, different. We are exposing students, regardless their background, to a more varied, a more diverse reality. And things that are atypical will be less, will be reduced. So there is an impact also with the reducing of bullying, especially in schools and young learners' classrooms. So this is why we believe that, and I say we because I'm talking as Ila Coimbra, but I'm also here representing Rise Up, of course, because it's the project I'm part of. That's why we believe we need to bring more inclusive materials to our classroom. But the thing is, who or what should be there in the materials we bring to the classroom? There is a long list of things and people who are not there. And this is the list. Actually, if you compare this list to the list that James and I first came up with in the first book, Raise Up book, you will see that that list is shorter, because the more we study, the more we participate in conferences, the more we discuss this issue of representation and lack of representation, the more we see how much is not there. And much as there has been some improvement in some with some groups, for example, women are better represented nowadays than they were in the 70s. Black people are more represented in position of power in the course books. But still, the list is really, really long. All these people, all these groups are not there. And I'm absolutely sure that our students fit at least in one of these categories, at least one of them. And I would like to draw the attention to the last ones about mental health and neurodiversity. Is also two topics, two aspects that we rarely, if ever, see in course book materials, in classroom materials, not only in course books. The thing is, we teachers, we have the power to bring that up. Of course, we would like to have mainstream published materials, although we have 3 published books in Rise Up. They are mainstream, they are published, but still we would like to see more, right? But much as we would like to see it, and there isn't much in the market, we can do it ourselves. And how can we do it? This is what we are going to discuss now. How can we make our classrooms more inclusive, and how can we bring a more accurate representation of society? Well, you know what's worth 1,000 words, right? Images. Images are key, and I think it's the easiest way to get the diversity of the world in our material, in our classrooms. These 2 pictures, illustrations, actually were taken from 2 different Rise Up books. The first one is from the first book, and you can see there is a lesbian couple. And in the second, in the family tree, in the second one, you can see a disabled person exercising. So this is a way to include, to bring more representation to society, to the classroom. Also, 1,000 voices. Bring the voices of those who are not represented. Bring those voices to the classroom. And how can we do that? There are 1,000 ways. Interviews, right? You can see on the left, interview with the professor of Indigenous African Religion and African Studies, African and African American Studies. So this is one Rise Up lesson also. So this person has a voice. Quote, Ellen Elgin is a Black woman, and she invented a cloth wriggling machine. And this is what she said about her invention. She didn't actually sell or patented her invention. And this is a quote of her. So her voice is there. And of course, there are many quotes from, for example, women, Black women. And then you can think about that list that I have just shown, just bringing those groups' voices to the classroom and not talking about them, but letting them speak, bringing their voices to the classroom. It's something that is very, very empowering. And bringing their stories also, right? Bringing their experiences, their lives, their realities to the classroom. Not telling them their stories, but allowing space for them in your classroom to tell their stories. There are, of course, some traps that we might fall into when we are trying to develop more inclusive materials. And we need to be very sensitive about these, because they're easy traps to fall into. We have to be sensible and use our empathy when we are creating this material, but we need to watch out for inspirational stories. Many disabled people are represented as inspirational stories in materials. And the thing is that the impression that is given is that look what these people have achieved despite their disabilities, despite their problems. So we need to be very careful with that. Not to, and also it also gives me the impression that this person needs to do something very, very out of the ordinary to be there. Because the white heterosexual man is there without having to do anything big and inspiring and etc. Also, it gives me the impression that the existence of these people it's there to make you feel better about yourself. So watch out with inspirational stories. They can be a trap when you're thinking about representation. We need to watch out for accidental stereotyping. So I want a gay couple in my material. Make sure that they are not, young, black, rich, young, white, young, white, rich, and that beauty standard that is sold by magazines and etc. Also watch out when representing, for example, elder learners, elder citizens, old people, that they are not like either they are there, but they are not sick, in need of help. They are not the grandma and the granddad, that they have names and they are doing ordinary things, not they have like blue hair and they wear different colors and they are all different. No, they're regular people. So we need to watch out for accidental stereotyping also. As I told before, we need to watch out not to bring these groups into a study, turn our classroom into a study lab of these groups they're not representing. So let's talk about Jack. Jack is a gay man. Let Jack speak. Oh, let's talk about English in South Africa. So the South Africans are these regarding their English. So why not bringing the voice of a South African to the classroom? Sergio Duran will give a great talk, I think it's today, if not tomorrow, in this event about othering. This is what he talks about. I'm not going to say much because you have to watch his talk. And last but not least, we need to watch out for not legitimizing inappropriate opinions. So, for example, bringing a debate about same-sex marriage. That's something that is not up to debate. That's simply correct. So, or bringing up the discussion if homosexualism is wrong or not. That's not something that is up to debate. We need to watch out when we bring these discussions into the classroom, so to make sure that we're not giving room to inappropriate opinions, racism, homophobia, and all the type of prejudice that there is. And I would like to finish this talk because I know my time is 1 minute. I have 1 minute to finish. Judy Boyle said that we need to be careful not to exploit the pain and the suffering for the sake of grammar syllabuses. We shouldn't turn the harm, the violation, the exploitation of enslaved human beings or human beings that suffer prejudice into a convenience tool for teaching. So we need to be respectful of their trauma, of their experiences, and respect, empathy, and justice come first. Lexis, grammar, skills are secondary there, and they must arise from the team. So we shouldn't be exploiting that for the sake of teaching. So this is another trap we might fall into. My time is up. So I would like to thank everyone for being here. Visit us in raiseupforalt.com. And you can find us, Rise Up, in Instagram, Facebook, Twitter with Rise Up for ALT. And you can also have my email if you need anything to want to keep on talking about this type of issue. Okay, thank you very much. And Chris, now it's your turn now, and I'm anxious to see your talk now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here on this chilly Madrid afternoon. And so thank you to Tyson, James, and the others involved behind the scenes. And also to Ilya for your presentation, during which I was carefully checking that I'm not going to repeat your comments. There is some crossover, but we've taken different directions. I'd like to open by positioning myself and revealing how I've potentially stained my work, as Joshua Pais might say. And I'll continue by positioning the research on which the talk is based. And then I'll take you through the main themes I discovered and some of the more interesting perspectives teachers offered to me. I've been teaching English since 2010, when I began as a high school teacher in Birmingham in England. Most of my students had either been born outside of the UK or in a non-English speaking country, or were English born, but didn't speak English at home. I found myself teaching English to many pupils who were already bilingual or even multilingual. This was quite daunting for a novice without any specialist training, and no, I don't consider the privilege of being a native speaker to be a sort of training. Nevertheless, I absolutely loved it. It surprised no one then when I decided to make the move into specifically teaching English to those who don't speak it at home. I'm a cisgendered gay man who also identifies as queer from a white Welsh background. I'm Welsh speaking, but the language of my upbringing was English. I was fortunate to benefit from university education, and I'm now happily based in Madrid, Spain, where Spanish is slowly displacing Welsh as my second language, and I have very mixed feelings about that. I embarked on a master's in education with a specialism in applied linguistics because I wanted to continue my own professional development, to improve my practice, and because I can't seem to allow myself to stop learning. By the time I reached the stage of preparing my dissertation, I knew it had to be about representation and identity in course materials. I looked at a sample of course books in current use here in Spain, investigating how gender and sexuality are represented. And to paraphrase 20,000 words, on the whole, gender was presented rather traditionally, although there were some images of women in positions of power. Minority sexuality, however, was conspicuously absent from the pages. I'd like to signpost Timothy Hampson's talk tomorrow, where he'll be talking about his study of course books. And while his talk is focused on the materials themselves, my talk today is focusing on my third research question, which use interviews with teachers to find out their attitudes and views regarding the materials they're asked to use. And for this talk, I'm drawing on two sources of qualitative data, the research from my dissertation gathered in a systematic way, but also some anecdotal conversational data. My study participants identify as follows. There were 5 who gave me half an hour or 40-minute interviews. And before I dig into the data properly, there are 3 salient quotations from the transcripts that I'd like to highlight. Participant 1 was particularly interested in the real world that her students live in. And participant 2 wanted to stress that she saw no reason to shy away from what she called these topics in her classroom. When I analyzed the transcripts in detail, I noted that three themes stood out in relation to the topic of my talk today: awareness, time, and training. I'll talk about each of these themes, as well as sharing what participants said about the materials they were currently using or had used, and some of the remarks they made about the material I was studying. The first 2 participants had a lot to say about the representation of gender in general, and women in particular. After acknowledging that she felt published materials had improved a great deal, participant 1 referred to the materials she was using at the time of the interview, assigned by her employer, and said this. There wasn't really much difference. And my second participant considered that the assigned course materials had been on one occasion irresponsible. On sexuality, I'll share just 2 concise remarks about the representation of sexuality in the materials the teachers had assigned to them, And these sum up the conversations that were had in the interviews and that I've had countless times anecdotally before and since. So 0. The first theme I want to highlight from my data is that of awareness. Participants in both my small-scale study and in later anecdotal discussions have highlighted their own potential lack of awareness as the first barrier to challenging coursebook bias. While discussing a page that featured 4, and I quote, different weddings, one participant commented, "It depends on the day, whether as a straight woman, I would necessarily pick up on that." Looking at the same page, participant 2 called it an exceedingly dated and one-sided look at the issue of marriage. The marriages were all heterosexual, by couples. She added, "I would not use those pictures. There's nothing to talk about. There's no variety." But she also reflected that outside of the context of the interview, which had heightened her awareness, she might not have noticed. After reading an article I published in the GISIG journal in January, a fellow practitioner wrote to me saying that when following course books, he is probably not as aware as he should be of how they shape ideas and promote bias. I think one of the most telling aspects of this remark is the use of the word following, and I'm not criticizing my friend and colleague. As teachers, we often rely on course books and we follow them. As I'll talk about later, we don't often have the time to produce all the necessary material from scratch for each and every class, and for many teachers, the course book is often treated as the syllabus. Novice teachers may find themselves using course books as a training tool, the teacher's book as a sort of in-service development manual. So if we are to follow them, change needs to happen. Another aspect of awareness is our awareness of our students. Our students have friends, family members, colleagues, and teachers who identify as LGBTQ+. One of my participants had an openly gay student in a teen class, and a far cry from the now infamous example for dialogue from Liddicott's 2009 study. She didn't correct the gender pronouns he chose when he talked about dating. She also mentioned how non-nuclear and therefore non-textbook kinship relationships always come up in class from her students, adding that discussing homophobia with teenagers is one of the times that I feel they really come into their own with their opinions on how we can counteract it in our society. And it would always come organically. Moving on, as I alluded to earlier, one of the main issues participants identified was their schedules and the lack of paid time they have to prepare lessons if the course materials need supplementing or adapting or completely replacing. Many teachers don't have the time to entirely vet everything that goes before their students, and novice teachers especially may feel they don't have the time to do this. Participant 2 would like to create more of her own materials, but simply doesn't have the time, and 75% of what she uses is assigned to her. She also noted that, unfortunately, when we're busy and we think, right, this is what we've got, and we're doing this is what's for the class, you don't take the time to think of these things. Interestingly, she also mentioned that she had fortunately read everything on one page ahead of time on the occasion that she found a reference in a mainstream course book to masochism. And I quote, "It was the strangest experience because it was an exercise that, if I was in a rush, I would almost think of glazing over and not even reading because I would think that'll take 2 minutes. It'll lead into the main activity." In preparing this talk and rereading these transcripts, I remembered the surprise of this answer during the interview itself, and then again later while transcribing it. I also remember the emotional response I had, which, whilst not particularly academic, I think is relevant to the fact that in this textbook, and I have seen and verified this, there is a clear and ambiguous reference to masochism, but homosexuality didn't make the cut. In addition, it's worth noting that topics of both race and age and the lack of appropriate representation of non-white individuals and older individuals, as Ila had mentioned, were brought up by participants themselves unprompted. I allowed them space in the semi-structured interviews to explore freely, but as they were not questions I was investigating, I didn't ask for deeper reflections. I think it's clear that when teachers are given the time, space, and environment to think and reflect about the issues of diverse representation they use in the classroom, they do. Participant 4 highlighted another issue relevant to time, and that's classroom time. And this participant, who identifies as queer, stated, "I know it's relevant, but lesson time is usually limited, and unfortunately classes often get derailed by polemical topics such as this, while referring to LGBTQ+ issues and gender." And this points, I think, to something else that I suspect remained unsaid during these interviews. There was a silent reference in each to a director of studies or a manager or a head of department and published curriculum goals. There was a sense that whilst, as participant 1 stated, I would love to see better representation of real life in my book, the teachers I talk to are aware of the explicit tuition that students are seeking and are careful not to be seen to be wasting time. I invited participants to look at some sample pages from the course books I have been examining. One was a page from a B1 PET course book used to teach adults that showed 4 different weddings of white heterosexual couples, different as the word that the course book used. One teacher couldn't believe the book had been reprinted in 2014. The second was from a book designed for primary age kids and was using images to teach the parts of the body. It included enabling the male body as having strong muscles and the female body as having a slender neck. And here are a selection of comments that were made that show how the teachers reacted to seeing them, from outrage to not wanting to use them. And as I'm conscious of the time as well, I'm going to move to the last theme from my data, which is the need for training. Now, this Web Carnival has been co-organized by the Teacher Development SIG, and I think it's clear that as a profession, the only thing we have in our control is what we do. We can ask, we can demand that publishers make more inclusive material that feature a more diverse representation of people, although it's unlikely that their response will have more connection. Sorry, it's likely that their response will have more connection to the purchasing decisions of managers than the demands of individual teachers. Ultimately, though, we are responsible for what is presented in our classrooms, and we can make decisions about what we place in front of our students. I have a vivid memory of being told about the importance of images in the classroom. It was 2010 and I was doing my PGCE and eager to start teaching. I remember that this was the first moment of many that shaped the way I have approached diversity and inclusivity in the classroom ever since. So returning to development and Joshua Pais, who has written in the preface to his recent book that the failure to adequately prepare educators to queer their practice reinforces the visibility of LGBTQ populations. As one of my participants stated, there is a need for teacher training about how to approach these themes, because from her perspective, there is awareness about getting it wrong, which I think we were examining in the end of Ila's talk. It is, as I would suggest, unlikely that initial teacher education programs are going to become much queerer as mainstream textbook publishers change in the representativeness of their content. So I also suggest that it falls to us to use our influence over fellow practitioners, whether we hold management or mentorship roles or just as colleagues, to guide other teachers towards materials that are more inclusive, towards theoretical approaches and towards books like Pais's that offer an approach to querying their pedagogy. We should also encourage our colleagues to question the materials that come bound in between covers and be ready to substitute and supplement, especially with images, as these can be a very powerful way to give or withhold representation. They and we also need to consider what texts pupils are reading, lest they are always reading the same stories and hearing the same voices. Whose stories get told and who gets effectively silenced in our classrooms, because if we give space to one image or story, we reduce the space for others. And also crucial, again, as Ila has mentioned, is questioning ourselves and encouraging colleagues to ask themselves what unwanted or unintended associations inclusion might bring. Are we remembering to show women in positions of power and responsibility outside the home, as the course books I examined often did, but forgetting to represent men in caring or homemaking roles? Are queer folk only shown when their minority sexuality is the defining factor? My research and my anecdotal experience suggests that those working in classrooms want to represent diversity, and that from their perspective, this would make the experience of their students richer. And in closing, I too would like to use a quotation, a thought from Audre Lorde. And thank you.
So thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Ila, as well. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to open 2 breakout rooms, one for Ila, one for Chris. And you can choose which room you want to go to, and then you can go to those rooms and discuss further with them any topics that you want to bring up. Yes, Ila?
James, just one thing that before we go to the breakout rooms, I'd like to apologize. I used the wrong term. While I was talking, I said homosexualism, and this should have been homosexuality. So I would just like to apologize for the wrong use of terminology. Sorry.
No problem, thanks. So, okay, I'm going to open those rooms now. You can choose which room you want to go to, and then you can discuss further with our 2 speakers. Okay, here we go. So you should have both choices. And obviously, Ila and Chris, choose the room with your name on. I mean, I'm sure you would love to go and speak to each other, but okay. Have you received the pop-up?
I don't see the choices yet, no.
Oh, okay. It's okay. Tyson, you try.
Okay.
See what I did wrong. Just give us a second, everyone.
That's funny. I see both of them. I can't do anything with them though.
Yeah. Oh, because you're not the host, are you? Oh, you're a co-host. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to try that again. Okay. No, okay. Same thing again. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try them again. That's it. Can all see you. So as you come back, you can turn off your cameras again. Not that I don't want to see you, of course, but that's it. Just a few to go. You too, Christian. Okay. So, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for those discussions. They were, Taylor, I'm going to bring you in a second, okay? Don't worry. It was great to see everyone in there. The discussions were really interesting. I really enjoyed them. So big thank you to you for participating. And of course, big thank you to Chris and Ila for their presentations and for leading those conversations. It was excellent. So thank you for joining us in this session. Okay, so next we have, let me show you. Oh, wrong one. Okay, second, here we go. Okay, so these are our next sessions in a few moments. So in this room 10A, we'll be joined by Taylor Viega, and in tent B, we'll be joined by Adam Scott. So if you want to join Adam's talk, go to our program and you'll find the link there. And if you want to see Taylor, then stick around. He'll be with you in a moment. Okay, that's it from me, everyone. Thanks a lot and see you around.